technologically advanced for its time as well. And on a maiden voyage, it actually struck an iceberg. It sank pretty quickly within a couple of hours. There was catastrophic loss of life, some survivors, and the ship was thought to be unsinkable, which probably is a dangerous tempting of nature, if you like, to say, well, we've built something that nature can't overcome. In other words, the great oceans of the world couldn't sink it. Well, this particular ship did sink, and you would think I'd be talking about which ship?
I would think you'd be talking about the Titanic, but I could be wrong.
Yes, you think that, and you would be wrong. Titanic sank in 1912. Well, a man called Morgan Robertson, he was a merchant seaman, I think. He wrote a short book called a novella in 1898, 14 years before Titanic sank. And this book was called Futility, although it was subsequently renamed The Wreck of the Titan, because in this story he wrote in 1898, this ship was called the Titan, which in itself is a bit spooky, I suppose. And so much about the story in the book is exactly the same as what happened. Now I've got some comparisons here. So the first one I say each time will be the Titan, the story in 1898, and then the Titanic. The name, an enormous ocean liner named Titan, the RMS Titanic. The reputation, considered unsinkable due to advanced technology. Titanic also considered unsinkable. Collision, Titan hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic. Titanic hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic. Timing, the disaster happens in April. Titanic, the disaster happened in April. Cause of the sinking, a glancing blow with an iceberg, not a head-on collision, did extensive damage, exactly the same as Titanic. In fact, they think if they carry it was dark and the lookouts only saw this huge iceberg very late on the Titanic, so they desperately tried to turn. They reckon if they'd hit it more head on, they would have not sunk. It would have been tough enough to survive. But because they glanced the iceberg, thousands of rivets, probably millions, came out of the ship where it struck, and that was enough to hold the ship. Lifeboats. Titan carried an insufficient number of lifeboats for all passengers. Exactly the same as Titanic. So many people died because there weren't enough lifeboats. Having said that, you'd think the lifeboats that there were would have been full up when they went, but sadly, tragically, a good number of them went with a handful of people in. They could take probably up to 50 people, possibly more, but some of them went out with 4 or 5 people. I mean, there was a women and children first policy, but of course there was the structure, the class system on the ship, so that those in steerage near the bottom had much more likelihood of dying. Those who died, it was just over 1,500, and about 700 survived. In Titanic, I'm talking about here, similar numbers to Titan. But in Titanic, 61 children were included in those who died, which obviously is a tragedy. 3 dogs survived, which is a bit of a strange one.
Wow.
But the owner, the designer, went down with the ship, as did the captain. So that was the cause. The speed they were going when they hit the iceberg, well, Titan was going at 25 knots. Going at 25 knots. When it strikes the iceberg, Titanic 22.5 knots. And lastly, the size, both very similar, 800 feet long, with a similar displacement of water, which is how they calculate the tonnage. Both were around 46,000 tons, over 50 when they were fully laden. So with that sort of information, do you think that book was a premonition with such similarities? Not just one or two similarities, like the name, it's very similar, or other aspects of it, but the real detail of that book. Would you say that was a premonition?
If it was real.
Well, yeah, but the book was written. Are you suggesting it wasn't written? This is
No,
a
no,
true
no.
story.
No. I thought it was
So he
just
wrote the book. He wrote the book, and basically told the story of the sinking of a great ship, largest British ocean-going liner at the time, and all the details is almost perfect in matching. Clearly, there would be some things that weren't matching, but
yeah,
the
yeah,
vast majority were. So,
yeah.
would you say that is a premonition or just coincidence? Because that's
I
the
would
next thing on our list.
I would
Coincidence, isn't it?
I would say that's a coincidence. You can't
Would
be
you?
that. Yeah, you can't. It's too strikingly accurate that, I just think, wow. Yeah, I would say it's a coincidence because he wrote the book. He didn't know about the Titanic. He didn't know. I mean, how long apart? What's the time
Yeah,
period?
1898. He wrote the book. 1912, so 14 years. That's quite a long time.
It
It
is.
wasn't, so it's incredible, isn't it, how he got all that stuff right. Now, you could say, some would argue that, well, coincidence is possible, of course, on anything, but
Yeah.
to have coincidences pretty much of all the key features of the Titanic sinking, so much of it was matching. And, could there in some way, was it some sort of warning from nature or providence that, hang on a minute, put this
Wow.
story there, don't ever
Yeah.
call a new ship unsinkable, make sure you've got enough lifeboats? And it could have been, if people had viewed that,
Yeah.
if it was well known as a book at the time, they could have stopped the actual thing happening. Some people
Wow.
would say that it's more than coincidence, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Well, I'm 50-50. So I'm borderline on coincidence and uh and premonitions.
Right,
So
okay.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, actually, I've got a rather unusual link to that. In the late 90s, I think.